Well, thank you, Bob, for the introductory remarks and for having me again. And I say hi to everyone else. I am starting to recognize your faces, so it is cool to see old friends back. So I'm waving to everyone that that has been on the tour before and that joined us again, as well as to my wife who's listening, and also her grandfather who's also with us again. So today we are in the third installment of the Vatican, and as always, we have to take the long trip, which is going to be shortened by our possibilities of technology, from the States to Italy, more precisely to the capital of Rome, more precisely to the Vatican, and obviously there we go to the very heart of the matter, the papal apartments. Just to locate where we are, you can see here the Vatican, which is surrounded, by the way, by the so-called Leonine walls built by Leo IV, and I will talk about him later. That's why I'm mentioning it. You can see the St. Peter's Basilica right above it, couched next to it, the Sistine Chapel, the Vatican Museum, the Vatican Art Gallery, which you remember from our first installment, and obviously the entrance to the Vatican Museums. Where the arrow points of the Vatican Museums, that's pretty much exactly where we're going to go, because that is one of the two courtyards, the more boring one, right? The Belvedere courtyard, which is basically a big parking lot, if you remember that from the last tour. And so we will climb up the stairs to enter the papal apartments, the historic papal apartments, I should say. Today, I guess we can talk about 3 different locations, even within the Vatican, that the Pope has lived, because we talk about the historic papal apartments that we're visiting today that have been out of commission as apartments for quite a while. Then you have the new apartments, the actual papal apartments that Benedict lived in and all of the predecessors, as well as the guest house Santa Marte, which is where the current Pope, Pope Francis, lives in. So those are the 3 kind of living spaces, quote unquote, of the popes. And so obviously the most lusciously decorated are the ones that we're going to visit today. Now, inside the Vatican Museums, there are multiple parts, and you know this already, so I think we can go straight ahead. So as last time, we go by the long queue of the Vatican Museums, right? Here you see the street sign. We go by the long queue that we have amply talked about last time, and that we're going to be able to skip today, which is always nice, and that makes everything easier also for the tour guide. And here we also have an aerial shot of the Vatican Museums just to show you where we are. So today we've seen the Pine Cone Courtyard last week. Today we're going to see the side of the Belvedere Courtyard, which is actually closest to the viewer, so closest to the Sistine Chapel, right? And so here now on the shot of St. Peter's Basilica, you have the Basilica, you have the Sistine Chapel, and then the structure, the construction right next to the Sistine Chapel on the right side, that's where the papal apartments, the historic papal apartments, and therefore also the Raphael Rooms are located. As last time, we're going to enter passing by the actual exit of the Vatican Museums, the old entrance, and there we have Raphael on the right side, kind of looking up to heaven, looking up into the transcendental spheres of beauty, and we go to the actual entrance to our left, skip the line and go straight in. On the inside of the museum, then the first thing that you always see when you come out of the terrace, which is always nice, is the Dome of St. Peter's Basilica. And then you remember from the first installment, the picture gallery, the Pinacoteca. We've seen that, so we're going to take a left, and we will see and we'll meet our dear friend Raphael of Urbino, or Raphael the Painter, as we know him. Now, Raphael, as you can see from the years, we have mentioned him a little bit when we talked about the Transfiguration. Raphael had a very relatively short life, so he only turned 37. He died probably of pneumonia, maybe of the coronavirus. So he died in 1520, and what we're going to see today is actually the culmination, really, of his career. Okay, so after he had already painted many things. Pope Julius II, who you remember maybe as the Pope that decided to build a new St. Peter's Basilica, Julius II decided to commission Raphael of Urbino to paint his personal apartments. So Raphael points a portrait of Julius II, which you can see next. And so that's not in the Vatican Museum, but it does give us an idea of that Pope. So here we have Julius II, who did reign from 1503 to 1513. So not too long, really, 10 years, really, after which he died. And after his death, Pope Leo X would succeed him. Now, Pope Leo X we'll speak about in the tour as well, because he is the one that keeps up the commission of Raphael to finish the Raphael Rooms. But some of the portraits get changed, as you can imagine. So you don't really see Julius II anymore, but who you actually see is Pope Leo X, and they look very different. So it's nice to get the contrast. So this is Julius II. Next we can see Pope Alexander VI, which is his predecessor. Okay, his predecessor, and then his successor, Pope Leo X. Now, Alexander VI is also important for our tour today, but only marginally, only really as a framework, because Alexander VI is really the reason why Julius II does not, commissions the new papal apartments. Alexander VI, and remember, to quote my Catholic but not always reverend friend, with 6 comes devastation. So he has a theory that every pope that has the number 6 is a really bad pope in history. I'm not sure if I completely share that view, but in the case of Alexander VI, as many of you know, that many people would agree with him. Alexander VI was one of the Borgia popes, the very infamous Spanish family that kind of usurped the papacy in the late 15th century. And so Alexander VI was very known. He's like the quintessential Renaissance pope, okay, whatever that means. Now, he was known for his nepotism. He was known for his, I wouldn't say debauchery, but definitely not super moral lifestyle, okay? And so Julius II really wanted to make a clear cut from that. He wanted to make a very clear demonstration that he is not like that. A little bit similar, for those who are versed in history, similar to Vespasian, who comes after Emperor Nero, and he says, I'm not that guy, okay? I'm not Nero, okay? You hate the emperor, it's because you hate Nero. I'm not that guy, okay? So even if you hate the papacy due to Alexander VI, Julius II says, look, I'm not that guy, I'm not going to be like that, don't worry. What I always like to point out with Alexander VI, and again, I don't want to dwell too much on him, but Alexander VI did not really change any church doctrine, which I always like to point out. Okay, he may have a very sinful lifestyle. He may have had a very sinful lifestyle, a very secular or worldly lifestyle, if you want to call it that. But he never really changed church doctrine. Okay, none of his documents that he issued is against church tradition. So that is, so maybe as a person, he was a questionable of integrity. As a pope, he certainly was not. So anyways, I think we can move on from Alexander VI and move briefly to Leo X. Sorry, Pope Leo X here is the successor of Julius II. So the order is wrong, because Julius II is really the important one, but it's Julius II, his predecessor is Alexander VI, his successor is Leo X. And those 3 popes we will talk about today. Bob, I think you wanted to chime in here. I just heard you briefly. Do you have a question?
I just wanted to pause and reconnect everybody to where we are. 1500 is 520 years ago. 1500 is just after 1492, which was Columbus's voyage to America.
Yes.
There's no settlements yet in America, but they're just starting. The new world has been discovered, and it's started to be heard about in Europe. And it's going to become, all through the 1500s and the 1600s, this massive outlet for Europe to go west. Spanish and Portuguese to go to Latin America, French and English to go to North America, the Spanish to go to Cuba and Florida, That all was going on in the 1500s. This is the year 1500 is the end of Alexander VI. It's full Renaissance in Rome. And he exaggerated his lifestyle. And partly for that reason, we start to have in Northern Europe among the Germans a kind of reaction to Rome as a little corrupt. And we start to get the roots emerging of the Reformation. And Martin Luther will come in 1517, and much of Northern Europe will go with him, and the princes will support. And so the Catholic Church, which had been united throughout all of Europe, becomes split into the northern part, which is Protestant, and the southern part, which is Catholic. That's just a summary of where we are here.
Fantastic. I could not have been more concise and precise. So thank you. Now, what is interesting is to see the papal rooms from that very perspective that Bob just described. Okay, we can look, we can visit, we are visiting the papal apartments, and we can look for the self-understanding of the Pope. Whenever you look at art, especially something that was commissioned by Pope, there is always a little bit, sometimes a lot, but at least a little bit self-biography in the art that is chosen and in the style that is chosen. Be it just as a matter of taste, right? Be it just as a witness of the taste of the Pope. So there's always a little bit, something a little bit biographical. And I think the Raphael Rooms show this most precisely. So let's move in to the first Raphael Room. Now, to give you a brief idea, the Raphael Rooms, okay, are painted from 1508, so under Julius II, up until 1524. That means they go beyond the life of Julius II and indeed beyond the life of Raphael. How does that happen? Is the succeeding Pope, Leo X, continues the commission of Raphael. So the popes decide, and that's not always the case. Okay, that's not always the case. Some artists just completely get ditched after a pope dies. Good example of that is Innocent X and Francesco Borromini, who really just was kind of wedged in Bernini and Bernini, like the first Bernini and the second Bernini in Rome. But Raphael does not get ditched, okay? He can finish his work, but now he dies himself. So what happens? This is a classical case, not something super revolutionary. His works are finished by his students, so by his so-called workshop. This, for example, does not happen in the same way with Michelangelo, who we will focus on next week, because Michelangelo did not have a workshop like Raphael did. Why not? Because he was not a painter, he was a sculptor. So he has students, but they can't paint. So Raphael's students very much paint. And one of them actually got famous, Giulio Romano. So he is the one that we will look at today as well. So these rooms, these so-called Raphael rooms, are right above, in the Vatican, right above the apartments of Alexander VI, for the reasons that I've described. And they consist of 4 rooms. And each of these 4 rooms basically has 4 walls, therefore 4 wall frescoes. So we're talking about very clear 16 frescoes. We're not going to talk about all 16 frescoes today. We will see all 16 frescoes, but I cannot explain all 16 frescoes, as you can imagine, in detail. And some of them really don't merit that long of an explanation, other than the historic event that they record, right? Good. So I think this is the most important thing. And in the Room of Constantine, now we stand. The Room of Constantine, and this is a beautiful shot that is from the Vatican Museum's homepage. In the Vatican Museum today, you wouldn't be able to visit the Constantine room or the Room of Constantine, because it is under restoration. Okay, so they usually, what they do to not make it really annoying to the tourists or pilgrims, they usually cover all walls but one, so you at least see one, and then they kind of move on. In the Room of Constantine, is actually, they always have 2 walls open, but nonetheless, today you would not be able to see most of the ceiling, for example. The last time I was in there, which was in July, all of the ceilings were covered. So I went in with my friend, we could just see one. We can just see the donation of Constantine. So today we're a little bit more lucky. We actually get to see all four of them. All right. So the Room of Constantine, as a general, is the, well, we should call it the victory of Christianity over paganism. And that all is represented by the story of Constantine. So the first image that we can focus on, so that we move on now, and the first image that we can focus on is the so-called sign in the sky. And I'm not sure if you're all familiar with the story of Constantine. We have talked about this briefly on a previous pilgrimage. Constantine naturally is the emperor who in 313, so more than 1,200 years before Raphael and more than 1,700 years before our time, allows, with the so-called Edict of Milan, to have Christians publicly worship. Okay, so Christians are allowed for the first time in the history of Rome to publicly worship in churches, which brings about kind of a rise of church building. We visited the Lateran, we visited St. Mary Major, we visited St. Peter's Basilica. All of those churches were built under Constantine, at least the first versions of them, right? So, and St. Paul also the walls as well. So what happened, right? What happened? Constantine is a Roman emperor, and he has a vision, and this is not something super uncommon, because the emperors would, before battle, always pray to the war gods. So they would pray to Mars or their family god, and so Constantine prayed to all of those gods as a pious Roman. He would do that, and all the pomp and circumstance that goes along with a public sacrifice to Mars. But then the night before the battle, when he gives last instructions to his army, he sees something novel. He sees a cross in the sky. He sees the clouds part and the cross in the sky, and he hears a voice, okay, the voice of the Holy Spirit, or the voice of God, obviously, which says, "In this sign you will conquer. In hoc signo vinces," okay, which here you see Constantine in the middle, you see the cross in the sky. He is kind of holding his hand forward, he is stopping, he's holding back in this moment, he's looking at the cross, and he says, okay, this is important, okay, this is important, I have to listen to this. And he hears these words. What's very interesting is that in the it's hard to see because this is a very pixelated image. It's hard to find a better one. So in what you can see, there is a little scroll, okay, like a papyrus scroll going away from the cross on the right side underneath the dragon. And on that scroll, it says these words, but it says it in Greek. Okay, maybe the Pope is also challenging all of his guests, for their Greek knowledge, right? Whatever was left from high school. And so it says en toto nika, okay? Now, which is usually rendered in Latin as "in this sign you will conquer, in this sign you will win," but it could also be more literally translated as "by this conquer," or "by this win." And obviously, this is the cross, which is a tiny bit different, because it means go and win in this sign. It doesn't mean there is an option, or if you do this, then you get the reward. Like, you can hit the jackpot, right? But you got to go this way. It doesn't mean that. It says take the sign and go win. Okay, and Constantine listens to this. Romans were very superstitious. Romans were very attentive to what the gods had to say. Remember all of the augurs and all of the reading of signs of animals and birds and stuff, right? So Constantine would be very attentive to this, and he says, okay, well, I can do that. And so he takes the cross. And so the next image, when we go on, in the battle of the Milvian Bridge, so in that decisive battle, when we move on now to the next picture, you can see that across, above the banners, above the Roman banners, you have the cross. And it's right in the center, you have the Roman eagle, and on top of the Roman eagle, you have the cross. So Constantine took this counsel to heart, and he said, yes, I'll take the sign and I will go conquer. And that's what he did. So what we see is the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, which is the famous battle in which Constantine defeats Maxentius, the usurper in Rome. And with this battle, basically, surplants his power in Rome. Okay, so it's more complicated, but that's basically it. Maxentius claimed the throne. Constantine came in, and they had a fight at the battle. They had the battle at the Milvian Bridge. And he wins and therefore takes over the imperial throne. So you can see Constantine right in the middle, okay, on a horse mounted with a golden armor, with a golden crown, and you can see Maxentius on the right side, on the right bottom, drowning with his horse, also having a crown on his head, drowning in the Tiber River. The Milvian Bridge is a bridge across the Tiber River. So there you can see Constantine, and this is basically the victory of Constantine over Maxentius. This will lead, okay, to the next image, the next scene, which is most important for the Pope, and that is the scene of the gift or the donation of Rome. Now we have two. Here is the one where you can see actually left and right. On the top you can see the cloth covering it. Okay, this is now happening right now. This is the restoration going on, but we also found a nicer picture of the whole scene. So if we move on now, then you can actually see the whole scene, which is the donation of Rome. And there you have a beautiful shot why this victory of Constantine is so important for the Pope. So this is the shot where Constantine, right in the middle, in the middle, a little bit to the left, kneels in front of the Pope and grants him the statue of Rome, kind of a symbol of granting the Pope power over Rome. Okay, so I'm giving the Pope the land of Rome and around Rome, what is to become the Papal States. Constantine himself, as you know, founds the city Constantinople, and so he's kind of off to the east, and he's like, okay, like you Romans, you can stick with the Pope, and you do what he says, and it's all good. And so he says, now that there is someone in charge, I can take off.
Dr. Bentz?
Yes, Bob.
Just to orient ourselves once again, this moment is regarded by some historians as the beginning of the Middle Ages. Others will postpone it another 150 years until the fall of Rome, and they'll say when Rome fell, that began the Middle Ages. And of course, the Middle Ages are in the middle between two other ages. That's the ancient world and the modern world. And the Middle Ages go on for 1,000 years, and we call them the Christian centuries. So when we say the classical world changed and became medieval, became a Middle Age, it happened here, or it notionally could be said to have begun here when the king of the Romans, the emperor of the Romans, bows and kneels before a Catholic pope, receives a sign of the city of Rome, and merges the ancient glory of Rome with the rising glory of the Catholic Christian faith. That's what we're seeing here. And it will go on. This is, in a sense, the first of the Holy Roman emperors. And Charlemagne will pick this up again in the year 800. And the Roman emperors, the Holy Roman emperors will be among the Habsburgs and Austro-Hungary right up until the First World War, when they were finally deposed, when the Austrians lost that war. So this is the beginning of a process that will go nearly up to our own times, which we call Christendom. And now we've got a secular age where the faith does not determine the political life of a country, or does not have much influence. We separate faith, church, and state. But this picture in this room, in the center of the Vatican, is the beginning of more than 1,000 years of history.
Yes, very well said. What is amazing, historically speaking, and also just artistically speaking, we have spoken about the first St. Peter's Basilica. And so in this picture, you actually see the event happening in that original basilica. And if you remember the baldacchino of Bernini, right, the kind of the twirly columns that looked a little bit strange, and I commented on it. Here you can see the original placing. This is where Bernini got the idea from. Basically, you can see behind at the end of the main nave, right at the apse, at the transept, you can see there's kind of like a bridge-looking structure, and it has 4 columns, and they are twisty. That's where Bernini gets it from. So I always like to point that out. This is the old St. Peter's Basilica from the inside. Later on this tour today, we'll see the old St. Peter's Basilica from the outside. Good. Let's go and let's look at the ceiling for the only time, really, because usually all of the Raphael rooms on the ceiling have only a pattern, beautiful patterns, beautiful with angels and gold and all of that, as we know from the Renaissance, as we're used to it by now. But this one has something else. And I always like to make a comment here, which I think is essential. Here you can see the cross in a long hallway. And remember, this is pinned on the ceiling. So you have to kind of look up, okay? So you look kind of into space. You can see the cross, and then you can see a destroyed pagan statue. And that makes sense. That is a very good symbolic way of showing what this whole room is about. It's about Christianity defeating paganism. But, and this is what I always was like, why on earth did Raphael's school pick a statue of Mercury? Because this is not a statue of Zeus, or of Jupiter for that matter, right? The Romans, Zeus is Jupiter. Why would you not take the highest Roman god? Why, in fact, would you take one of the lower Roman gods, which is Mercury, okay? Or, Mercury for the Greeks and Hermes for the Romans. Why would you take him instead of Jupiter? And you can tell that it is Hermes or Mercury by the staff. It has the staff on the floor, the staff of the 2 serpents, right, going around the staff and looking at one another. I don't know. It's hard to see. It's a small detail, but you can barely see it. To the feet of that broken torso, you have that staff, and you can also see the winged helmet of Mercury. That's maybe easier to see, and which both are an indication that this is Mercury and not so Hermes and not Jupiter or Zeus. So why would Raphael school take that statue? And I have a theory. I think it's not too far-fetched, it's not too misleading to say this, but I think what the Pope tried to say here, and what the artist certainly tried to say here, is that it is not just Christianity winning over paganism, but it is Christianity winning over any kind of superstition and occult knowledge. And this is as important for the 16th century as it is for our time, as it is for Constantine's time. Because today, well, back then, pagans are those who do not know Christianity. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Today we kind of have that term as like a negative, but it's not that negative. It's just a connotation of those who don't know Christ. But superstition is something else. Superstition or occultism does not preclude the knowledge of Christianity. It is something that could also endure Christianity. And I always like to bring up in this room, and this is doing a little bit of a jump here of 200 years, but I also like to bring up Isaac Newton in this room, because Isaac Newton, as like the scientific mind, right? What you learn in college and university, the scientist who was all dry and mathematical and correct and scientific and all of that, right? As you know, Isaac Newton basically gave up on mathematics at the age of 25, but he lived till 87, I believe. He became really old. What did he do in 50 years? What did Isaac Newton do for 50 years? And I can tell you what he did. We know this. We know this from his biography. I'm quoting one from Richard Westphal, which you can buy. He did magic. Magic. We're not talking about like, oh, he didn't go to church. He tried to summon demons. And we know this because we have the receipts from his London shopping trips that show what kind of alchemical devices he bought. He tried to fabricate gold. He tried to make an artificial human being. And he tried to do all of these occult rituals, which have been there for thousands of years. Okay? And even though he's considered the founder of science, the world that he founds, the scientific world, he leaves behind because it's not a world where a human being can actually live. It's cold and it is death, and it will ultimately lead into like a complete mechanicized world. And he does magic. At the same time, also, he rewrites history, by the way. He wrote a 10-volume church history making a point that the Trinity of Christianity is not the true Christian God. I don't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole, but read Richard Westphal's Isaac Newton, and I think it is plain there, especially from chapter 4 onwards, how Isaac Newton was not a scientist only. He was at least partially, and most likely about half of his personality was dabbling into magic. And so the artist here, and so why Mercury? Because Mercury is the most important god for the alchemists, because Mercury as a metal purifies gold. And as you know, alchemical theory, occult theory, wants to make gold out of nothing or out of a lesser metal. And so Mercury is essential. So the artists here in the 15th century already was aware of this, because they would have occultists in their time, alchemists. And so they said, we're going to put this in to make it timeless. It's not just Jupiter. Jupiter is long gone in the 15th century. No one cares about Jupiter. No one cares about Jupiter now, but people still care about occult theories. So I always like to point that out here. Sorry, that was a very long excursion, but I think it's worthwhile to point that out just because of that little tiny staff, which bothered me so much. Okay, I think we can move on without further ado to the next room. Then we go, it's a relatively small door actually that we go through, and because the small door, and they can see it on the left bottom, it's just supposed to be for the Pope, right? And maybe some personal guests. So there was no large gate necessary, no beautiful ornamented kind of portal. So it just had a little door, and that's the door that the Pope would go from one of his rooms to another. So the Room of Helios, and so the first image that we're looking at is the namesake, so the expulsion of Heliodorus. This is actually pretty quick to explain. Heliodorus was sent by the Seleucid king to sack the Temple of Jerusalem. So we can move on to the next image. He was, and the chief priest Onias, he knelt down in prayer at the altar, and so God sent 3 angels in the form of young men, one of them on a horse, to expel Heliodorus from the temple. And so you can see Onias praying and kneeling in the center, looking up to God, right? Always looking up to heaven. That's where God is. And then on the right side, you see the three young men with kind of swords and kind of flagella kick out Heliodorus. Heliodorus is on the ground, and the gold coins that he stole from the temple gold are spilled on the ground. So the idea is that he'll leave those behind and he'll escape. The whole scene is witnessed, and here we have this idea of Raphael juxtaposing different moments in time that we've already seen last week. This whole scene is witnessed by Pope Julius II. You can see him on the left. So on the left side, there is a Pope. Seems kind of out of place because he is out of place. Completely different century. We're talking about the end of the 3rd century BC, okay, but the Pope kind of time travels back then to witness the whole thing. So Julius II, as the commissioner of this painting, is put in here on his seda gestatoria, which is the seat on which the Pope is carried. What I always like to add to this, and because we know this from the Bible, we know this from the book of Maccabees, and we know this from the book of Daniel, 11:20, that Heliodorus actually goes back to his king empty-handed, and instead of, explaining to him that, well, he had to wrestle with 3 overpowering angels sent by God, he kills him. And so he assassinates his king, and the king then is succeeded by one of Heliodorus's family members. And so it's a very interesting take on the stealing treasure from God, because stealing treasure from God does not just hurt the person who owns the church, but it also will corrupt your own heart, and it will ultimately lead to death, as exemplified by the story of Heliodorus. So I am pretty sure that Julius II made a friendly reminder to all of the guests who are here to not cheat the church for money. Otherwise, you know what will happen, right? So kind of a wink moment here by Julius II. Anyways, we move on to the wall opposite, which is it's actually the adjacent wall. I'm sorry, the adjacent wall, which is the Mass at Bolsena. And so there's a couple of things to say about here, and I'm sure that also Bob will chime in here. The Mass of Bolsena is a moment that happened in the 13th century. Okay, and it's the so-called miracle of Bolsena, which happens in 1264. And the story is very simple. There's a priest who does not believe in the transubstantiation. He doesn't believe that the bread on the altar is actually Christ. And so one day, he celebrates Mass, and the host, which then he turns into the body of Christ, starts bleeding. And it actually stains the corporal that is underneath, right, to catch any particles. And so the priest falls down in awe and believes in the transfiguration. And so Julius II visits Bolsena, which is by Orvieto, and he visits it, and he prays at the relic of that corporal on which blood had dripped. And so to commemorate that moment, Raphael juxtaposes 2 scenes. He, on the right hand, paints Pope Julius II in prayer, along with his cardinals below him, that witness the Pope at the shrine. And on the left hand, Raphael does a little bit of time traveling 250 years before, where the miracle actually happened. And you can see the priest celebrating Mass while that miracle actually happens. And you can see the altar servers in awe. You can see the flames, nice detail, the flames not going straight up, but being pushed away by the wind of the Holy Spirit, right? Remember the Holy Spirit in St. Peter's Basilica, we talked about that. So the wind of the Holy Spirit, and everyone that is attending Mass kind of freaking out. Okay, so the left bottom is all hectic because everyone is witnessing the miracle and doesn't know how to, what just happened. The body of Christ just started bleeding, the host just started bleeding. So there you can see the upheaval. What is very neat is that miracle actually led to the feast of Corpus Christi that right? Corpus Christi we still celebrate today, and so it was instituted by Pope Urban IV on behest of St. Thomas Aquinas. So St. Thomas Aquinas, being a great reverent voice for the Eucharist, writing many Eucharistic hymns, gives the Pope the idea to institute this feast that is specifically designed, dedicated to the body and blood of Christ. So the body of Christ, Corpus Christi. So this is, again, another nice fresco commemorating multiple things at the same time, always with Julius II, obviously, in the center. All right.
Dr. Bentz.
Yes, Bob.
Well, a brilliant and wonderful presentation. I do think the movement of the candles there on the left side, the wind, representing the coming of the wind of the Holy Spirit, reminds us that we are on 2 levels, the level of the material and the level of the spiritual. We use the fire and the movement of the fire and the wind to build a bridge between those two. We rise from the material toward the spiritual. We are nourished spiritually by words. They don't change our intestines. They don't change our chemical setup, but words, and then the thoughts they provoke, and then the reflection, and then the decisions that we make, these do affect our body. The spiritual and the material are intertwined. Jesus was always saying, I bring you the bread of life, but we were thinking the bread of life is what we grow in wheat and in the fields, and we make bread out of it and we eat it, and we needed that. But he was always referring to the bread from heaven, which is foreshadowed in the Old Testament by the manna, and which we now have in the Eucharist, which is, we believe, his own self. And we spiritually are transformed into Christ by sharing in the Eucharist. Thomas Aquinas, as you rightly mentioned, was not just a dry doctrinal theologian, but a wonderful musical genius, in a sense, with the beautiful hymns that he wrote, Tantum Ergo Sacramentum. This miracle is preserved in Orvieto, just north of Rome. I've been there, and the blood drops from the host on the linen are said to create an image of the face of Jesus. That's what this is also famous for. This is all from the late 1200s when Thomas Aquinas was living, Bonaventure, St. Bonaventure was living, about 50 years after Francis of Assisi.
Yep.
And then we're about to go into the 13 and 1400s. And so they're describing a miracle here that's about 250 years ago for them, about 750 years ago for us. Thank you, Doctor.
That's right. Thank you. No, that's a great comment. I actually have still not been there, unbelievably, even though it was on my bucket list. And so probably now, due to all of the travel restrictions and our son, we may have to still put that on hold. But I will go there. So I figured that you have been there, actually. Good. We look at the next wall adjacent to this one, which is the victory of the Pope against Attila. And Attila the Hun recalls a sacking of Rome, okay, that is halted by Pope Leo IV. And so he is the one that actually builds the Leonine Wall outside the Vatican that that today is the border to the Vatican. And so we have a beautiful moment of Attila the Hun coming to Rome and the Pope coming out of the city walls. And in the very background, in the center, you see the Colosseum in the sunset or in the sunrise, I guess. You have the Pope blessing, and so Attila and his Huns kind of start freaking out, and they leave. Probably not only because of the sight of the Pope, but mostly because of St. Peter and St. Paul appearing as giant figures in the sky with their swords unsheathed and kind of in an attack motion that you can also see here, recorded by Raphael. So Attila says, okay, we're not going to mess with these people. And they go back where they came from. Now, in the next image is a little tiny detail, and that is the Pope himself. That is Pope Leo X, who at this point has succeeded Julius II. But there's a curiosity here, because Raphael paints and designs this image to feature Julius II on horseback. But he does paint two other cardinals. And so the cardinal on the far left is indeed the cardinal that will succeed Julius II. So Leo X, but as cardinal. And then Julius II dies, and you have Leo X as Pope. And so Leo says, no, just put me in there. And Raphael's like, well, you're already in there. But he said, yeah, but I'm not in there as Pope. So he put him in again as Pope. So you got twice Leo X. You got him on the left side. So of the two cardinals, he's the one on the left, kind of a chubbier guy, right? And they had a very good cook at the Vatican back then. And then you have him again on horseback. And so you have Leo X twice, once as Pope, once as cardinal. Always love to point that out. All right. And the last image of this room looking a little bit at the time, is the deliverance of Saint Peter. And this is the story that was very dear to Julius II's heart, because before he was a pope, his titular church in Rome was indeed Saint Pietro in Vinculi, so Saint Peter in chains, which is the church that has the relics of St. Peter's imprisonment in Rome. So Julius II would know this episode very well from his days as a cardinal, and obviously St. Peter getting rescued by the angel out of imperial prison is a very good symbol of that the Pope cannot be held down by secular powers. And again, here we have this combination, this idea that the Pope at the same time is victorious over secular powers like Attila, or pagan powers like Attila, but at the same time he is also safe from their attacks. Even if they imprison Peter, they imprison the Pope, they cannot hold him. And so what is very interesting here, and this just links back to our Caravaggio tour that we have already done, is the study of light, because we have three types of light. We have the light of nature in the moon. You have the light of that is man-made in the torch of the soldier in the front left, and then you have divine light, which is channeled through the angel that saves Saint Peter's from his prison cell while the guards are sleeping. And then you see him again on the right side, leading St. Peter out into freedom. Sorry, on the right side, leaving St. Peter out to freedom. So you have the studies of three lights. Least is the moonlight, then you have the torchlight, and then you have angelic or divine light in that gradation. So the divine light is the most important one. And this is certainly one of the images from Raphael that Caravaggio studies in order to learn about darkness and light. So just keep that in mind, and looking at Caravaggio paintings, this kind of light darkness interplay is very, very essential. All right, now we're going to move to the next room, which is the most important, and so I want to dedicate most time here up until we just kind of leave through the fourth room, because this is the room of the signature, kind of a inconspicuous name there, the Stanza della Signatura, which is the room of the important documents. So this is the room where Julius II would sign all important papal documents. Now, looking at the first image, that's probably the most famous one, is the School of Athens. Now, I don't want to go too much over time today, and I'm just looking at the time that we got, but I do want to spend a little bit of time here, not just because I'm a philosopher, but also just to show you the genius of Raphael, because there's a couple of things here that are worth noting. The School of Athens, so the room has four walls, like all of the other rooms, and so the School of Athens mirrors the so-called disputation of the sacrament. So the two are somewhat in communication, right? They're communicating somehow. And then on the left, you have the Parnassus, and on the right, you have the wall of law. They call it the wall of virtues, but it's basically the wall that deals with law. And so the reason for these four images, so for Parnassus, that represents poetry, the School of Athens representing philosophy, the wall of law representing law, and the wall of the disputation representing theology, so poetry, philosophy, law, and theology. This was actually the room that had the library of Julius II on the ground, and the library was partitioned off into four segments. As you can imagine, poetry or literature, philosophy, theology, and law. So, so the wall frescoes mirror what's in the what's in the books underneath. Now, I can go completely nuts on this one. Okay, I can just give you like a 2-hour explanation just on this image, and I'm not going to do that because I'm not going to bore you to death. But if you're ever interested in philosophy, then we should have a private chat, because this thing is truly, truly amazing. But I just want to point out a couple of things. Number one, the whole school is divided twice. Okay, it's divided up and down and left and right. So below, okay, separated by the 4 steps, are the pre-Socratic philosophers. On the steps are the Socratic philosophers. The 4 steps. 4 steps are the 4 steps that would also lead up every altar. So they have reached the higher truth, the Socratic philosophers. Okay. And then you have a left and a right. The left here is governed by the guy with a red toga who points upwards. That is Plato. The right side, the guy in blue pointing downwards, is Aristotle. So you have the Platonic philosophers and the Aristotelian philosophers. All right. Now, some of them actually, well, Raphael puts in a strange placing, but that's the general layout. And then there's what is to say there? The first thing that I think we should really appreciate, and I know this is not easy to appreciate for someone in our time, but we should really appreciate this, is both of the philosophers are represented with their most important book. So Aristotle, as you can imagine, holds the Ethics in his hand, the Nicomachean Ethics, which is the most important work. Plato, maybe you will think, oh yeah, the Republic. Is not the Republic. Is the Timaeus. Now, that is interesting because you would say, well, why the heck? Again, why do they not choose the most important book? Why do they choose like a minor dialogue? Okay, well, the reason for that is that the Neoplatonists of Raphael's time only knew of 5 Platonic dialogues. All of the construction of 2,000 years of Platonism in the West, okay, is based on 5 Platonic dialogues. They did not even know that Plato wrote the Republic. Raphael did not know that Plato wrote the Republic. We really have to appreciate how much Platonism is in Raphael just by through 5 dialogues. Okay, that's amazing. The Timaeus arguably is though the most important of the Platonic works because it has his cosmic theory, so the theory of everything in it. And so that, I think, may also be one of the reasons why Raphael uses that one. Okay, enough of Plato, and there's one more thing. Plato's head. Plato's head is not historic. That face is not the face of Plato. And we know more or less what Plato looked like. That face is the face of Leonardo da Vinci. So there you have a little bit of a Dan Brown moment, right? Now, Raphael references Leonardo da Vinci because he considers da Vinci as the best Platonist of his own time. And as I mentioned before, they're personal friends. So da Vinci would just be kind of a natural candidate for that role. So da Vinci here is the head of Plato. Now, if you go on the left, there is a man standing in green. Okay, he's balding. Okay, he's the side of Plato. He's green. He's very evidently green. And he's counting on his fingers. That is Socrates. And that gesture, counting on the fingers, I mentioned before. Yes, during the tour of Caravaggio, when the angel tells St. Matthew what to write into his gospel. So this is where he gets it from. Then on the far left, and I always love this, this is, as a journalist / philosopher, this is like one of the greatest kind of Raphael moments. Okay, I'm a big fanboy of this. On the far left, you have 3 gentlemen who are cast out by one of the Platonic or the Socratic philosophers. They're cast out, and Apollodorus is like, shush, like, you guys get out of here. Like, come on, no ticket, okay? You don't have a mask on, you don't get in, right? And so these 3 guys, who are those 3 guys? Those 3 guys are the sophists. Who are the sophists? The sophists were the people, the so-called philosophers, they're not philosophers, but they're the so-called philosophers that you could pay for orations. So you could pay them to give a speech. Okay, that's, in my book, that's called a politician. Those are not the thinkers, okay? Those are the guys that you pay for speech, right? like Bill Clinton. Oh, sorry. Okay, so these are also the guys that have that wrote most of their speeches down. That's why they have so many scrolls in their hand, right? So we don't have much of Plato, oral tradition, right? We don't have much of the Socratic philosophers of Socrates. None. Socrates wrote nothing down because it's all about the spirit behind it, the ideas of the soul. But the sophists saying nothing, getting paid for it, wrote everything down. Okay, again, I have in the back there is like the kind of, the like politics alarm bell ringing. Anyways, all right, moving on. Now, the guy underneath the sophists on the left is in blue, and he has a crown of laurel. He is very small, so it's hard to see, but he is actually Orpheus. Orpheus being the beginning of Western thought, of Western literature, and so Orpheus has the face of someone that you never heard about, and that's fine. Phaedra in Girami, but Phaedra in Girami, who was that? That was the painting teacher of Raphael. So Raphael says, the beginning of all thought is in Orpheus, and the beginning of all brushstrokes in my life is done by Phaedra in Girami. So I love that. Okay, two more on the bottom, on the left side, in white and pink, you have Pythagoras. Okay, I'm not going to speak much about him, otherwise there's no end to this. And then there are two more figures in the center, and I must mention them. The man that is half nude in blue, lounging on the stairs, is Diogenes. So he is the philosopher that cannot be put in any philosophical school, because he is the founder of the skeptics. And so he very famously lived in a barrel, right? The philosopher of the barrel. And there's a famous story when Alexander the Great comes and hears about Diogenes, crazy guy. And Diogenes, he goes to him and he stands in front of the barrel and he says, Diogenes, come out. And Diogenes comes out of his barrel and he says, I'm Alexander the Great. I'm like the most important, most famous, most powerful man in the world. I will grant you any wish. You just say it. And Diogenes looks up and he says, can you please get out of my son? And so that's a very famous story. And then there's one more person that I must mention. That is the man in the middle, on the lower ground, leaning on what looks like a desk. Okay. That's one of the philosophers, and that is oh dear. Okay. Okay. Sorry, my mind just went blank. You gotta be kidding me. Wow. Okay. I forgot his name. It's the one that says Punter Bob. Who's the philosopher that says everything is in flux, everything changes?
Heraclitus.
Heraclitus, thank you. Oh my gosh. Okay, thank you. So that's Heraclitus, who is I
didn't know that was him, but
yeah, that's him.
When you look at the two great philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, pointing up and pointing down, and then when you say that he's carrying the Timaeus, I was checking about the Timaeus. That begins with the story of Atlantis, by the way. It tells the story of Solon, the first of the great Greek legislators. He was sort of we might call him something like the Thomas Jefferson of Greece. He went to to learn the ancient wisdom of the Egyptians. He lived about 800 BC. And in Egypt, he heard the story of Atlantis, a great city, a great culture, a great nation that was flooded and fell into the sea. And then they go on to discuss the origin of the world, and that's the discussion that is in the book of the Timaeus, what the universe is. And the two main elements of the universe are the spiritual realm, which is unchanging, but eternal, and the material realm, which is changing, which is always in flux. And that's where we get to your guy in the front, Heraclitus, the philosopher of flux.
Yep, that's right.
There's one little passage I thought might be interesting for our listeners, but it's going to take about 30 seconds. Should I read it?
You can do it. Read it.
This is from the Timaeus, the book that Plato is holding in the Vatican Raphael Rooms that we are looking at here, painted 500 years ago, but the Timaeus dates back to 2,500 years, approximately. And it says, there have been and will be again many destructions of mankind, arising out of many causes. The greatest have been brought about by the agencies of fire and water, and other lesser ones by innumerable other causes, including viruses. No, he doesn't say that. Innumerable other causes. There is a story that even you Greeks have preserved, that once upon a time Phaethon, the son of Helios, having yoked the steeds in his father's chariot, because he was not able to drive them in the path of his father, burnt up all that was upon the earth, and was himself destroyed by a thunderbolt. Now, this has the form of a myth, but really signifies a declination of the bodies moving in the heavens around the earth, and a great conflagration of things upon the earth, which recurs after long intervals. Well, it's not really a hopeful scenario, but it's a realistic one, saying that anything that happens to us has happened before and thought of happening before by our ancestors. And so we, I think, should remain steadfast and strong, facing whatever is coming.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. What is amazing about Heraclitus is that, and this will require you a little bit of a schooled eye, but I think the best way of doing it is look at the figures that stand above next to Plato and Aristotle, and just kind of don't look at any figure in specific, just kind of let your eyes sway left to right, and then look at Heraclitus. And like if you do that 2 or 3 times, you realize there's something different. And one is that he is larger, and that's just because he's in the foreground. But there is another thing that is different, and maybe the more you do this, the more you'll see it yourself. The painting style is different. That's what's so amazing. It is painted differently. And here comes my myth busting of many a book that have been written emphasizing the animosity between Raphael and Michelangelo. This Heraclitus was not in the original blueprint. You can go to the original cartoon, he is not there. Raphael puts Heraclitus in after he sees the Sistine Chapel. He walks in because at this point, Michelangelo is working contemporaneously 2 rooms down in the Vatican on the Sistine Chapel. He goes in and he is so awestruck that he wants to have a personal reference to that great painter. Who is that great painter? Michelangelo. He paints a portrait of Michelangelo in the center of the School of Athens, destroying in a way, or disrupting in a way, his composition, which was a perfect kind of like semicircle, like an arch. And he paints him in his own style. He does not paint him in Raphael's style. He paints him in Michelangelo's style. Obviously, that's also a little bit of a show-off. Be like, well, what you can do, I can do anyways. But that is a beautiful homage towards Michelangelo. And he indeed says, Michelangelo has not even fully manifested his full genius. And this is, and I'm sorry, I should have included another image. There is an image, and if you look at my video, I can show you. There is an image in the Sistine Chapel of Isaiah, and we can see it next week, where you see Isaiah, okay, and he looks like this. He has his head up, turned to the side, and he kind of just lifts off his hand, thinking like that. And he paints Heraclitus in the moment before that happens. So he paints Michelangelo in his style as a reference to the prophet Isaiah in this style. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And it refutes any overemphasized animosity between these. These two artists both felt blessed to work for the Pope, to work so close to one another. They looked at their stuff. Of course, there is professional competition. Of course, there is. It always is. If there's another kind of philosopher that teaches the same thing than me in the room next to it, of course, I'm going to talk to a student like, well, what are you talking about? And I talk maybe to him. I'll talk about, well, what are your footnotes? What are you reading? Right? What are you teaching? That's normal, but that doesn't mean that I hate him. It just means that we have a different way of approaching the same thing. So I always love to point that out. And with that, looking at, I'm not going to take too much more of your time, but we're going to look at one more image in depth in this room. The next one is the virtues, which again, it's called virtues. Remember these names. So if you can move on to the next image, these names are not given by Raphael himself. They're given by Giorgio Vasari in his Life of the Artist. So I would definitely disagree with two of the titles. This one is called Virtues because the virtues above, much more important, are the people down below, which are Justinian receiving the Roman law, the Codex of the Roman Law on the left, so secular law, and Gregory the Great with the face of Julius II, as always, receiving the Codex of Canon Law on the right. Secular law, ecclesiastical law together. All right, moving on to the other large piece that are in this room. And this is luckily a little bit easier to explain. Okay, sorry. Okay, well, let's do the Parnassus. Parnassus is opposite of law, and so that's Parnassus, the god, right? The god of poetry, or the big poet of the Greeks. Apollo, the god of poetry, on Mount Parnassus, surrounded by the 9 muses, okay? Always love Apollo hanging out with 9 women on a lonely mountain. No wonder that he was writing all poetry. And then you have the biggest poets of their time kind of all gathered. So you have the guy on the left side in blue is Homer, and to his left in red is Dante, to his right in green is Virgil, and then you have other contemporary Italian poets as well. Now moving on to the largest piece in opposite of the School of Athens is the so-called disputation of the sacrament. The disputation of the sacrament is not a real disputation. There was no disputation going on. So Vasari just kind of took the feel of the people on earth, but this should just really be called theology, because all that this image is an exposition of theology. You have the Eucharist, you have above it, on the altar, obviously, the Eucharist. Above it, you have the Holy Spirit with the 4 Gospels. Above that, you have Jesus Christ with the Virgin Mary and John the Baptist. And above that, you have God the Father. The School of Athens is couched in a temple-looking structure, which is actually the old St. Peter's Basilica, or the design of St. Peter's Basilica by Bramante. This image is out in the open, and it doesn't have an end. The golden rays that are around God the Father, they don't end, because there is no end to theology. Theology as an object has something that is by nature incomprehensible to the human mind, because it's mystery, right? Incarnation, creation, transubstantiation, the Trinity. These are all mystical parts of the faith and cannot be fully grasped by the human mind. But theology is the ongoing endeavor of trying to find that truth. So on the bottom, then you have kind of the all-stars of theologians. So you have Saint Jerome, you have Saint Augustine, you have, as Bob already mentioned before, you have Saint Bonaventure and Saint Thomas Aquinas. Those are the ones on the right side with the darker robes. Okay, Bonaventure is the guy with the funky hat. That's a cardinal's hat in a Franciscan habit. And behind there is a balding, kind of heavier set man that is Thomas Aquinas, and many others. You have all of the theologians that Raphael thought to be important. And obviously then around Jesus Christ, you have the heavenly all-stars, as we so often encounter. What is very interesting is that these two are the largest images and the most important ones, because life is really all about nature and about grace. So philosophy, diving into what nature is, theology diving into what grace is. Nature and grace, philosophy and theology, reason and faith, right? So there you go. So those two, I think, are worthy of having spent some more time with. All right, let's leave this room and go to the last room. And again, I'm just going to brush over. I do want to stick to the schedule. And I want to leave you 5 more minutes for questions as well. So here you have the so-called Room of the Fire in the Borgo. And so this room was finished under Leo X. So there's very little Julius II in this, but rather Leo X, his successor. And so what do we see as a first image? We see the Battle of Ostia. Now the Battle of Ostia was battled against the Saracens. Can we switch to the next image? You can see the Saracens, and you can see the papal army together with other national armies under the guidance of Leo IV, same guy who built the Vatican Wall, same guy who built the Leonine City, right? Well, that's what the Vatican, the Leonine walls kind of refer to. And Leo X, being a pope with the name of Leo, obviously had a huge admiration for all Leos that went before him. So this is Leo IV winning a secular battle. And you see a common theme in these Raphael Rooms, right? The next image also concerns Leo, as the same one, Leo IV, during the fire of the Borgo. And you can see the Pope in the background on the papal loggia blessing, because there's a story that the Borgo, which is the quarter next to the Vatican, was in flames, and the Pope stepped out of his apartment, right, and he blessed the flames, and so the fire stopped. So that's a beautiful little anecdote that Raphael also used. What is important about this painting or this fresco is that behind the Pope there is a building that is kind of has a yellowish facade, like an ochre facade, and that is old St. Peter's Basilica from the outside. So now you've seen old St. Peter's Basilica from the inside, and you have seen, as I promised, old St. Peter's Basilica from the outside. Moving on, we have the image of the coronation of Charlemagne. That was yet another Leo. That was Leo III, who on Christmas Day 800 crowned Emperor Charlemagne. So you have the perfect merging of secular and ecclesiastical power. Not the usurpation of one by the other, mind you. This does not mean that the church surrenders to the emperor. Neither does it mean that the emperor gives up his land to the church. It means that there's a perfect unison, a perfect harmony of these two. And maybe in a future pilgrimage, we can talk a little bit more about church and state. I think that would be a great subject that this would certainly open, but I think we're running out of time and also maybe patience. And last but not least, also Leo III. So we have 2 images of Leo IV and 2 images of Leo III is the last one, which is the Oath of Leo III. Now, the Oath of Leo III goes back to the same year, 800, when Leo III took an oath of purgation because his predecessor in the papacy was a noble, and the family of Hadrian I was still very much around, and that family did not want Leo III to be pope because he wasn't noble. And so they invented all kinds of allegations against him, and so he swore that all of these are false. With that, he was purged of all all of assault, legal assault, and could actually live out his papacy. Now, that's not where the story ends, but that's what this painting commemorates. So you can see him solemnly swear on the Bible on the altar. So that's also a very neat image. Very good. So with that, we leave the Raphael Rooms and we can go to the adjacent structure, which is the Chapel of Urban VIII. And in that chapel, we have a beautiful altarpiece, which is the Pietà, painted by Pietro da Cortona. So Bob, if you want to lead us in a closing prayer in front of this beautiful Pietà, then I think you should do that, and then we can ask questions for whoever has questions.
Well, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit,
Amen.
I would pray that we all have the serenity to face any challenge that comes in these days, in these difficult times. The serenity of heart to face them with calm and wisdom and grace and charity with our families and with our friends and with all people. And so that we can travel these days and weeks ahead in a serene way, untroubled, let nothing disturb us. I pray the Hail Mary. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us
sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.